Hello again, welcome to today's video. My name is Stacey, I'm a mess in a dress, and today is the second chapter of my January book wrap-up. As I mentioned in part 1, I read approximately 38 books in January, and when you read that many books, it does take a wee while to talk about them all, so I've split it into two halves. This is part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, then I will link it above. And below for that matter. And yeah, so all of these books are in no particular order, it's just as I kind of think of them. And yeah, let's get started. So first up was a book by one of my favourite authors. You all know who I'm talking about. It's the incomparable Julie Quinn, and this is The Lost Duke of Wyndham. So The Lost Duke of Wyndham is a bit of an interesting book because it's actually part of a duology. It is teamed up with Mr. Cavendish, I presume, and the two books coincide, they interweave, the characters are all connected, and the couple from this book and the couple from the other book do kind of both appear in both books as the stories intermingle. This was read as part of the Rake Appreciation Society's January books. It is a book I've read before and I really, really like it. I didn't get a chance to read Mr. Cavendish, I presume, just because I was reading an awful lot of books in January. And as that was a reread, I decided I wasn't going to take the time to reread it at that particular moment. But actually, if I'm being honest, that is the one I prefer. However, The Lost Duke of Wyndham is about Jack Audley. He is a highwayman when we first meet him. And he holds up the carriage of... oh, if only I can remember her name. The Dowager Duchess of Wyndham and her companion Grace. And instantly the Dowager Duchess recognises something familiar in Jack and decides that he must be her long lost grandson. So she drags him to her house and proceeds to try and prove that he is in fact the actual Duke of Wyndham, and the current Duke, who is the hero from Mr. Cavendish, I presume, is possibly about to be, I guess, sacked. Both of the books are a lot of fun. They're all of Julie Quinn's usual kind of banter and wittiness, and all of her flair for telling a story is evident in both of the books. Jack is a fantastic character. He is very reluctant to be dragged into this family mess that he's found himself in, and the only reason he really sticks around is Grace, who is the heroine. She is the long-suffering, long-term companion of the Dowager, and I really like their relationship. So I do find it a little bit weird when you finish this book. You kind of feel like you haven't read the end of the story. It's not a full cliffhanger. This romance does wrap up and resolve, and you could completely read it as a standalone, but you're itching to find out what happens with Thomas and Amelia, who are the couple from the second book, and it feels a little bit unfinished. So it does make you really, really want to read the second one immediately, but they are both really good fun, and it's just another great Julie Quinn classic. Can't beat it. So in January, I continued reading the With This Kiss anthology that I think I mentioned in my December roundup, and my progress has been slowed down a bit because I have been reading so many other books, but I did manage to read one other book from this anthology, and that was Gather the Stars by Kimberly Cates. Now, when I first started this book, I knew nothing about it. The blurbs in the anthology are not necessarily forthcoming. They don't tell you an awful lot about the plot, but I wasn't 100% convinced when I very first read this in the first chapter. The heroine, Rachel, comes across as a bit kind of stuck up. She's just a bit kind of arrogant and very spoiled and used to all the attention. She, in the beginning chapter, has a fiance as well as a potentially ex-love interest, I think, and neither of these appeared to be the actual love interest of the book. So I was a bit confused as to where exactly this book was going to go. And then very early on, Rachel is kidnapped and taken to the lair of the Glen Lion, who is a bit of a kind of outlaw character. It's all set in Scotland. It has real kind of Outlander vibes to it. There's this band of Scottish outlaws and kind of people who've been cast out and they're all in hiding, and then there's the English who are, you know, living the high life and generally trying to cause trouble. I absolutely loved this book in the end. It was really beautifully told. I loved the fact that it really kind of twisted expectations, and Rachel discovers that the Glen Lion is not in any way what she would expect him to be. I think his real name's Gavin, if I remember rightly. But he's not in any way your typical kind of outlaw bandit kind of character. He's actually quite sweet, quite reserved and almost a little shy. He's just sat in his office with his specs on, working away, minding his own business, and he's not in any way what you would expect from a bandit. He doesn't come across as particularly arrogant. He's actually really polite and really sweet, and is terribly ashamed of this whole mix-up that's brought her to his camp. I loved this romance. The romance was really beautiful, watching them both kind of get over their assumptions of each other. She's made a judgment of him before she meets him. He likewise has assumed he knows her, and it was lovely to watch them both come to terms with the actual reality. There were some great dramatic moments. There was a villain, and it turns out Rachel has to come to terms with her life and her background not being exactly what she thinks it would be. The whole book just worked perfectly for me. I absolutely loved it, and I will definitely be looking out for other books by Kimberly Cates in the future. So I am a massive fan of Cresley Cole, a paranormal romance writer, or predominantly her paranormal romance series, Immortals After Dark. And as I said in, I think, the beginning of January, I have recently kind of met a group of girls. It's a seasonally booked up at Immortals After Dark book club chat, and they are currently in the process of rereading some of them rereading for the first time, the Immortals After Dark series, which is one of my favourite series of all time. It's absolutely fantastic. However, a lot of them were talking about the audiobooks and how they're really, really good and they're really entertaining and you really ought to give them a try. Generally speaking, I hate audiobooks. I don't get on with them. I cannot stand having people's voices in my head when I'm trying to listen to something. I'm trying to kind of absorb. I like to be able to hear what I think the voices would sound like. I also find sometimes they're a little bit cringeworthy. Sometimes, you're having some quite raunchy scenes read out loud. It's just, it's a whole thing. I've never been convinced. I've tried it a few times. It's never won me over. But as I love these books so much, and as these girls were raving about this, and the narrator, I think, is Robert Peckoff, I think his name is, and they were raving about him, about how fantastic he is, so I thought, I'm going to give it a go. And I started with A Hunger Like No Other, which is the story of Emmeline, a half vampire, half Valkyrie, and her mate, who is Lachlan, who is a likey kind of werewolf kind of character. The book is one of my favourites. I adore all of them, as I've said before, but it really, really struggled with the audiobook. The narration was interesting, but it did feel a bit odd in places. It was very weird hearing all the different characterizations. The voice of Emmeline in particular I found really difficult to kind of adapt to until about chapter 7 or 8, and then I was absolutely won over. I couldn't say there was anything particularly in that chapter, but I think I must have just got used to how it sounded and how it felt, and now I'm a little bit addicted and I just have listened to so many of these audiobooks, and I love them because I can put them on when I'm in the car and I'm driving to work. So obviously I can't read in the car, but I can listen to the audiobook. The stories I'm familiar with, I don't know if I'd like it as much if it was a story that I didn't know, because I like to, when I'm reading for the first time, I want to experience it my way, but then after that I can have their interpretation of it, and that's okay. So I think that's why I particularly like this series, because I do know the books already, and so it's just interesting to hear them told in a bit of a different way. So far I've got a couple of my hard copies here just to prove I do absolutely love them. I've listened to A Hunger Like No Other, No Rest for the Wicked, Wicked Deeds on a Winter's Night, Demon from the Dark, which was a particular favourite. Jesus Christ, Malcolm Sloan is one of my favourite heroes anyway, and hearing him come to life and the characterisation of him was just fantastic. Plus Caro is a great character. That whole audiobook was just spot on. I adored it. And then I've also listened to Dreams of a Dark Warrior, which is probably one of the ones I've actually read the least. It's Regan the Valkyrie and Declan Chase, who was actually the baddie in some of the books. He is running the order that experiment and kidnap all of the immortal creatures, and if you know me, you know I can't resist a redeemed baddie, so his book was great. And again, having that read out loud to me, hearing the accents, hearing all the different characters from that, it was just lovely. I'm loving hearing all the side characters. I'm loving just experiencing these stories that I know so well in a different format. It's really, really interesting, and I am listening to more this month as well, which will pop up in my February roundup. But yeah, I am now an audiobook addict, although at the moment only if they're by Cresley Cole books, but we'll see if I can branch out in the future to something a bit different. So next up, as part of the Winter of the Wallflower book club, we were reading Secrets of a Summer Night by Lisa Kleypas, and I've never read anything by Lisa Kleypas. I've heard a lot about her. I know she's a very popular author. I know the girls in the chat were really kind of keen to read her, and I was not massively fussed at the beginning of the book. So when the book started, I was a bit, it's all right. It wasn't blowing me away. I really, really, really did not like the heroine for the beginning of the books. So at the beginning of the book, we meet Annabelle, who's going to a panorama show with her brother. And while they're there, they bump into Simon, who is the heroine? They bump into Simon, who is the hero. And he offers to pay for their tickets because they don't have enough money. And Annabelle is instantly really, really judgy of Simon because he is the butcher's son. He's very, very wealthy. He's a self-made man. He has lifted himself up and made himself, you know, somebody to be noticed. But he's from trade. He's from a common background. He's not of the aristocracy. He's not of the nobility. And she instantly takes against him. Now, some people, rightly or wrongly, think that his actions at the beginning of the book, he's a bit arrogant, he's a bit kind of self-assured, but I really, really liked his character. I know a lot of people mistrust his intentions towards Annabelle, but I think because we don't see an awful lot from his point of view, we don't necessarily see what his intentions are until a little bit later on. And I wonder if a lot of it is, it's kind of a Pride and Prejudice, making snap judgments of people, and that's kind of what this book is about. Like I said, for probably the first maybe half, maybe like the first third, just wasn't really convinced. I was not digging Annabelle at all. I found her really stuck up, really snobby. She was completely obsessed with the idea of marrying into the aristocracy, which I understand was important back then. I do get it. But at the same time, her family were desperate for money. She really needed to marry, and there's this rich guy who's paying all this attention, but she won't even consider trying to win him over and get him to marry her because he's not from a noble family, which I really didn't like that. However, and it's a big however, about halfway through, events occur which throws Simon and Annabelle together, and Simon has to look after Annabelle and care for her, and she starts to see him in a whole different light. From this point on, I absolutely adored this book. I loved seeing them come together. I loved seeing Annabelle kind of reevaluate her opinions and her perspective of Simon, and I think that's a symbol of a really, really good book. It is okay if I don't like a character at the beginning, as long as you convince me that they have changed and grown and developed throughout the story. That's absolutely fine. Where Annabelle ends up, how this book ends, is absolutely beautiful. It's really emotional, it's really moving, and it's really just satisfying as a romance. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I ended the book on a completely different note to how I started it, and I will definitely be looking forward to reading some more Lisa Kleypas in the future now, because this completely won me over. So then in January, I also read 2 books by Lorraine Heath, who is another author that's new to me. I told you I found so many new authors this month, it's not even funny. So the first one was To Marry an Heiress, which I actually got in a mystery box from eBay. I ordered, it was 5 historical romance. I didn't know, I think it did list what was in them, but I didn't know anything about them. It had no kind of description or anything. It just sent them, and this was the first one. So this features that age-old trope of the handsome earl whose family is running out of money, his estates are in trouble, and he has to marry for money, and he meets an American heiress who is Georgina Pierce, and there's a business arrangement involved, and basically he's going to marry her for her money so that she can be made into a lady and he can have the money to restore his estates. What I really like about this one, and I'm not spoiling anything, it does mention it on the back there, but it turns out that maybe she may not be as much of an heiress as they both originally thought, and then the book carries on to deal with how they both overcome that. By this point they are married, they are together, and he has the choice of basically, does he continue with the marriage even though he's not getting out of it what he wants out of it, then he wants to stop her necessarily getting what she wants out of it, and there's a whole drama, it's a thing, but it was really well done. It was a little bit sedate for my liking, it was a little bit kind of very gentle, very just nice. It was a very cute romance. I did like where the characters ended up, and I did enjoy it, but it wasn't the most thrilling book I've read in January. However, I saw on Alicia _Reads, you know I talk about her all the time because I always get fantastic recommendations off her, and on her Goodreads she just finished reading the Sins for All Seasons series, also by Lorraine Heath, and she'd talked very highly about them, about all of the books in general, particularly the last one. So I thought, I might have to give that a go. Generally, we like the same kind of stuff. So I picked up the first one, which is Beyond Scandal and Desire, and this one was a bit more kind of fast-paced. It had more action to it. I was really, really, really confused by the prologue because it features an unnamed man who is dropping off a baby outside of a house. It's an illegitimate baby, and I thought for a while that might be the hero, and I was like, whoa, this is a really out there start to have your hero dumping an illegitimate baby on a doorstep. It wasn't. The baby is the hero. The baby is who becomes the hero of the book. And he is obviously an illegitimate kind of, again, the self-made man, the kind of the man who's raised himself up and made himself into something from nothing. The heroine is Lady Aslyn Hastings, I think you pronounce her name, and she is a very sheltered but very kind of well-to-do young lady. She's potentially going to be getting engaged to kind of a long-term family friend very shortly, and when she meets Mick, she is instantly overcome by her attraction to him. He's obviously very dark and very brooding and not at all the kind of man she's used to dealing with, and I don't want to give too much away because there are some pretty big twists in here, one of which I absolutely did not see coming. I probably should have done, but basically the whole premise of the story is that Mick, the hero, is out to get the family that are connected to Lady Aslyn and her fiancé, and he intends to use her as a kind of weapon and a tool to get his revenge on them. And the whole book follows that, how their relationship develops and how that interferes with his plans, and how maybe he has to change his plans to adapt the fact that he's getting feelings for her, and how her feelings come out. And of course there's got to be the moment when she finds out that secretly it's all been a big revenge plot, that the connection between the two families and how it all pans out was just beautifully, beautifully done. I didn't see the end twist coming. It took me by surprise. The only iffy thing I have about this book at all is that the main character's name is Mick Trewlove, spelt Trewlove, which I didn't really have a problem with until I actually at some point said it out loud to myself and thought, True Love. You called the character Trewlove, Mr. Trewlove. What? That's just it's a bit on the money there for me. I thought that was a little bit strange. But it obviously didn't stop me enjoying the book. It was fantastic, and yes, I will absolutely be continuing to read the rest of the series, because if book 6 is the best one, then it seriously has got to be good to beat this one. So next up, actually going way back to the beginning of January, we have the first read from the Winter of the Wallflower read-along, and this was Mary Balog's The Gilded Web. This was a bit of a strange book. So it was originally published in 1989, and as with some older romances, it's quite slow. It's quite in-depth. It's quite kind of bulky. There's a lot going on in here that isn't just the romance. Modern romances tend to, even modern historical romances, tend to very much cut to the chase. It's very much couple-based. It's very much, all about the romance and the action and keeping... There's very little secondary plots going on. Sometimes you'll have little bits, but generally not much. This is really quite involved as a world-building exercise. There's loads of side characters. They're having relationships. They're having intrigues and romances. It is jam-packed. The lead character is Alexandra, and she basically finds herself in a compromising situation through no fault of her own. She's kidnapped by accident. It's meant to be a prank. It all goes horribly wrong. And the brother of the person who set the prank up decides to offer her marriage to try and repair her reputation. She is really resistant to that, doesn't want to marry him because she doesn't want to be told what to do, but agrees to kind of spend some time with him to see if they'll suit, to kind of get together with each other and kind of just see how it's all going to work out. That then sets you off for most of the book. But what I really found frustrating about this book so much, and sorry if it's a little bit spoilery, just if you're going to read this, maybe, I don't know, come back later, but Alexandra, I get that she wants to be independent. I get that she lives in a time period when women didn't have a lot of options to them and they didn't kind of have the freedom to do what they want. But she is so determined to be allowed to make her own decisions that by the end of the book, she's willing to make her own decision to leave the hero, who is Edmund, and not marry him and go off and live her own life, possibly as a governess, possibly as a governess or as a companion, purely to make the point that she can, even though by this point she's already kind of fallen in love with him. And actually right at the very end of the book, or quite near the end of the book, there is a scene where she basically tells him that, yeah, I'll probably regret this my whole life because I'm kind of in love with you, but I need to be able to make this decision for myself. I need to go. That kind of nonsense, bullshit, cutting your nose off to spite your face just does nothing for me. I get that she wants to have the right to make her own decisions, but everything from Edmund suggests that he will be a very lovely, caring husband who will basically let her do what she wants and let her live the life she wants to live. And it just seemed a bit contrary to try and throw all that away, throw away a life of luxury, having everything you ever wanted, including a husband who would love you and care for you, just so you could say, I made my own choice. Especially seeing as, did she really think a governess or a companion had that much freedom? Like, I don't think they did, sorry love, sorry to disappoint, but I think you probably would have less freedom as a governess than you would as a countess who, you know, ran an estate. So it wasn't a bad book. I personally didn't like the character of Alexandra, and I didn't like her kind of philosophy in life and the way she kind of dealt with her romance. It wasn't my favourite book. I know it is a series, there are other books. I may one day come around to reading them, but I'm definitely going to be rushing to it. But it was definitely interesting to read something that maybe I would never have chosen to read on my own, so there you go. So if I may take a break for just a moment from historical romance, we have My Cover Model by R.L. Kenderson, and this is a modern day romance, and what I really was intrigued by this is it's about a romance author. She writes romance novels, and she, at a book conference thing, she meets, I cannot remember his name. Yeah, so she meets Travis, who is a cover model for romance novels, and he's really hot, and he's a bit younger than her, and she doesn't think he could possibly be interested in her, but they kind of have a bit of a flirtation, and eventually she hires him to be the cover model on one of her books, and he then goes to a book fair with her, and they spend an awful lot of time together, close proximity, yada yada yada. I think you can guess where this is going to go. It was a really fun romance. I think my only problem that I had with it is there is a lot of focus made on the fact that she is meant to be a slightly bigger, kind of plus size, luscious lady. He's obviously a supermodel, very fit, very athletic. He's a personal trainer as well. He's a model, so he's very kind of body conscious. And she spends a lot of time reiterating how much she's into body positivity, and she's totally happy with herself, and she's totally, you know, comfortable being a curvy girl, but at the same time, don't make me feel bad because you want to exercise and I don't, and, you know, I'm sick of being judged because I've got curves and I don't want to exercise and I eat this and I don't. She seemed to have an awful lot of hang-ups for somebody who talks all the time about being body positive, and don't get me wrong, I realise you totally can, like, I have hang-ups of my own, as I'm sure every other woman does. I just kind of felt that if you were trying to write a character who is comfortable as she is, she needs to be a little bit more comfortable as she is. There's also a section right towards the end where there's a bit of a trust issue, just basically to cause a bit of conflict and drama. She, after spouting all this nonsense about how she's completely comfortable and she trusts him and she's totally cool with him being a model, she then has a moment where she totally doesn't trust him and jumps to all the worst conclusions. And that just pissed me off a bit because it just felt a bit forced and a bit orchestrated. It didn't feel like it was necessary in her character to literally leap to that conclusion. A simple text or a conversation or a question could have resolved all of that problem. And don't get me wrong, I've had trust issues in the past, I get the thing, but it just felt out of character at that point in the book, considering she's been totally cool all the way through with him chatting to other women until this one moment when she's just like, he must be cheating on me, he must be sleeping with someone else. I found it a little bit forced. So it was an enjoyable book. I would definitely try something by the same author again, but it was not my favourite book, and I felt there were areas that it could have improved to make it just that little bit better for me. So we're going to finish off this vlog with 3 new authors that I have become absolutely obsessed with. And first up we have... First up we have Wicked and the Wallflower by Sarah MacLean. Now I've just started reading this whole series. It is the Bare Knuckle Bastard series. I've heard an awful lot about it. I'd never read anything by Sarah MacLean before. And oh my god, this book. I actually speak about it in my historical romance readathon vlog as well. The first prologue and the first chapter just grabbed me, threw me into the action. I was absolutely riveted. I couldn't wait to find out more about not only the 2 characters in these books, but the characters in the following books as well. I adored Devil as a character, and I really, really loved Felicity and how it felt like a very different relationship to a normal historical romance, and I love a standard historical romance. I don't need anything fancy, but I just liked the slight differences in this. I liked how she does not back down even when Devil is kind of trying to be all grumpy and intimidating, and she's just not scared of him at all. She just comes in. I love that she picks locks as well. That's a really interesting little facet to her character. And all of the backstory of Devil's family and all the things that are going on with his brothers was absolutely fascinating. It really gets me wanting to read the rest of the books. I'm actually halfway through book 2 at the moment. And yeah, it was just lovely. I loved the little nods to kind of fairy tale references. There are some bits where they make comparisons to Rumpelstiltskin, for example. It was just such an easy, quick book to read. I just rattled through it. And yeah, this is definitely shaping up to be one of my favourite series of 2021 so far. It's absolutely brilliant. What I also loved is I'm a bit of a traditional damsel in distress heroine. I do like to be rescued by the hero. Everybody loves a kind of white knight, shining armour, all the rest of it. But I did like the fact that this has a bit of both. There are elements where Devil has to come and save Felicity, but there are also elements where Felicity has to save Devil, and that just really, I love that. I love a bit of, you know, equality among the sexes. There's no reason why you can't both save each other. That's the important thing. So this is an absolute definite 5-star. Would recommend to anybody, and we'll be back in February to talk about the next two in the series. So next up, another of my new favourite authors is Tessa Dare. I read her novella When She Was Naughty in December, and it just convinced me that she was an author I needed to pay more attention to. I wasn't wrong. This month I read her, what is the series called? Someone tell me what the series is called. So I started her Girl Meets Duke series, and I obviously started with The Duchess Deal. This book is absolutely fantastic. The start of it is just blinding. So Ash, the Duke of Ashbury, is war-scarred. He's sat in his office, he's bemoaning his lot in life, and he is contemplating the fact that he needs to find a wife when who should turn up at his door but Emma, a seamstress, wearing a freaking wedding dress. This opening scene was absolutely fantastic, and it grabbed me almost immediately. So in the very, very first scene, the Duke of Ashbury is writing a letter to his sister telling him that he needs a wife, when literally at that exact moment, there's a knock on the door and there's a woman wearing a wedding dress, and there's just this beautiful moment where the Duke kind of looks at the note, looks back up as if like, huh. And I was just in stitches. It was just such a perfectly written moment. It worked so well. This book was just fantastic. It's a marriage of convenience story with all of the usual things you would expect from that. The whole resistance to love, yada yada yada. It is also very steamy. There's some very, very passionate, hot moments between Ash and Emma, and he's a scarred hero, which we know I can't resist. I absolutely love it, and it's just so emotional and so beautiful, and this is exactly the kind of book I want to read all day, every day. I really, really enjoyed it. So I immediately moved on to book 2, which is The Governess Game. I love a good governess story. They are my all-time favourite stories of all time. I don't know why, there's just something I really like about them. There's a bit of a Cinderella element to them as well, isn't there, with the whole governess being usually, you know, falling in love with the lord of the manor, whatever he is. This is a particularly good example of the governess kind of trope. Alexandra is in desperate need of money, she's in need of funds, and she is hired by Chase, who is rake of the century, to help look after his 2 wards. There were so many fantastic moments with these kids. I absolutely adored the fact that Daisy, the youngest, has a weird kind of morbid fascination with death, and her poor doll keeps dying of numerous crazy illnesses throughout the book. It was so much fun. There were so many laugh out loud moments that I can't even recall them all off the top of my head, but I just remember thinking that I just can't remember enjoying a book this much. I also knew it was going to be hard to beat the first book because I'd enjoyed it so much, but this one absolutely held its own, and the 2 of them are brilliant in their own right for so many different ways. It was also really lovely that you get to see the group of female friends with Emma and Alexandra, and then there were the 2 friends who I think are Nicola and Penelope, who were in the other 2 books. So it was just a lot of fun to see this all grouped together, and also the guys start to have a bit of a friendship, and that's quite enjoyable as well. What I find interesting about this one is normally in governess tropes you have the whole them trying to resist going into an unprofessional relationship. In this one they both kind of quite quickly went, nah, sod it, let's do it, and that was quite an interesting dynamic, and they are carrying on an affair for quite a long time behind the scenes before it all comes out into public. It was just so much fun. I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to ruin it, but I really, really liked this, and I have now started the 3rd book in the series, which is The Wallflower Wager, I believe. Definitely a highlight for me this year. Whew. So sorry about the brief interruption and costume change. My family came in just as I was shooting the end of that video, so I had to stop and pause and then re-film the end of the video at a more appropriate time. Here we are. We've only got one more author to talk about, and this author is probably the one that has made the biggest impact on me since the start of January 2021. I am obsessed with everything she writes. I can't wait to read more. She's blown me away, and that is Stacey Reid. So, first book that I read by Stacey Reid was The Royal Conquest, and this was recommended by Crystal at Crystal's Bookish Life. She was talking, I think she'd read it, and everything she said about it made me think it was a book that I really needed to read. Basically, it is about an American heiress, Peyton, who has decided that for reasons of her own, she has no interest in marrying a noble, a aristocrat, anybody with a title. She finds that whole kind of lifestyle and the politics that come with it to be just not interested to her, so she is going to marry a common gentleman, just somebody who doesn't have all the title and all the bump that goes with it. She is very, very happy to bump into Mikhail, who is a horse breeder. She meets him in the stables in a very kind of sexy, bantery scene right at the beginning of the book, and she's instantly attracted to him. He's attracted to her. They get very flirty, and kind of a romance starts to blossom almost immediately. But what she doesn't know is that Mikhail has a number of secrets, one of which is that he is quite a bit more noble than he's letting on. I can't remember what it says on the back, what his actual status is, so I'm not going to say here, but it might tell you on the back. But let's just say he's definitely not just a common horse breeder. And also, he has quite a dark past where he's had a bit of trauma and been through a pretty horrific situation, which has left him with a few hang-ups regarding sex and relationships with women and, you know, the way he will be with women in bed. The second Crystal mentioned that in a blog, I was like, sold, I want to know what it is, I want to know what's going on. It wasn't as out there as I kind of expected it to be. I read a lot of other books that had kind of more out there sexual hang-ups. This was very much just kind of low-key, but it was still really sexy. It was still really interesting. Reverse snobbery as a trope is one of my least favourite kind of romance tropes. I hate it when someone won't marry someone because they're richer or posher or whatever than they are. That's just a bit... I don't like normal snobbery, but reverse snobbery seems even worse. It's like, that's just being petty. But it was handled really, really well. It wasn't done in a way that I found too annoying. There was a bit of conflict between them, as there has to be, but it was all kind of resolved quite comfortably and satisfactorily. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much that I went on a hunt for every Stacey Reid book I could find. And in January, I read... I had 4 other Stacey Reid books. And I think about the space of like 3 or 4 days, I just rocketed through them. They were so good. So next up, I read Accidentally Compromising a Duke, which was book number 1 in Wedded by Scandal. And this book, it's close to being my favourite Stacey Reid book. It's close. It's battling there with a later book, which I will talk about in a minute. But Accidentally Compromising a Duke is such a fun concept for the beginning of a book. Basically, our main character, Adeline, is trying to avoid a marriage with a bit of a slimy old guy, as a lot of women of that era kind of were. So she decides she is going to sneak into the bedroom of a gentleman that she's been kind of in love with for a while in order to compromise herself, so they'll have to get married and she will live happily ever after. Her friend Evie assists her with this. She tells her which room to go to. She kind of helps her with the sneaking out. Little does she realise Evie's told her the wrong room. There are numerous reasons for why Evie's told her the wrong room, and I'll leave you to find that out when you read the book. But she sneaks into the room of Edward Rochester, who is also known as the Mad Duke, who's less mad and more just grieving the loss of his wife and child from before the book started. So I thought calling him mad was a bit mean. He's grieving. He's a grieving widow. But anyway, she sneaks into his bedroom. They get frisky, I guess, and they get caught and they get compromised and they have to get married. And from then on, this book was just so much fun. I really like marriage of convenience stories. I like people being forced together. I like people who don't want to fall in love, who end up falling in love. Obviously, you had all of the usual. Edward doesn't want to love his new wife. He doesn't particularly want to be connected with her or interested in her. She's purely there to just help raise his 2 children from his previous marriage, and that's all he wants from her. Obviously, that's not all he gets. And it was really sweet, and it was very romantic, and it was very sexy. There are also some... You can't talk about Accidentally Compromising a Duke without talking about the fact that there are some definite similarities with The Duke and I. There is a plot point right at the very end, I think we all know which one I'm talking about, which very much mirrors the storyline from A Duke and I, but it is handled very, very differently. It's a very different setup. So I wouldn't automatically say if you didn't like The Duke and I personally had no problem with that scene. But if you didn't like it, then I wouldn't automatically rule it out. It's done very differently. It's a very different setup, but you can't help but notice the kind of the mirroring between the two of them and how that plot is handled in a slightly different way and how it's resolved in a slightly different way. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. It was a great book. Bizarrely then, I think due to the Historical Romance Readathon, I moved on to book 3 in the Wedded by Scandal book, which is How to Marry a Marquess. I really, really need to go back and read number 2 because I've got no idea what happens. Book 3 is Evie's book, who is the friend who tricks her into going to the wrong bedroom. And in this book, you find out a little bit more about why she tricked her, about her backstory, and the fact that she has been in love with Richard Maitland, the Marquess of Westfall, for forever. Forever and ever and ever. Since she was like a young girl, since she first met him, she's besotted with him, infatuated with him, all the rest of it. And he, for various reasons, she's the sister of his like friend, she's younger than him, and he is considered a rake. He's got a really bad reputation, and for various other reasons that the book goes into, he is considered a completely unsuitable match for Evie. She is not the kind of woman that he should be spending any time with. He would just, ruin her reputation and probably ruin her life. So he is seeking to avoid her, she is seeking to definitely not avoid him, and the book kind of gets into the plot with her suggesting that he help her to learn how to seduce a man to fall in love with her so she can have a husband who she actually likes and she is interested. We all know that's not what she really wants out of the situation. She obviously is trying to seduce him, but it's one of those. This leads to many, many, many steamy, sexy moments. There's one in a carriage, which I always appreciate a good carriage scene. And what I also really liked about this book is that there are a number of times when we look at a different side of Regency society than we would normally see. We see the side that isn't all balls and afternoon tea and, fancy dresses and bonnets and muddies. We see a very different side to it. Richard is very involved in helping people from the lower classes who are in more difficult circumstances, orphans, maybe people who've been left with no money or no jobs. He's really keen on helping that and he's really involved in that, and one of his problems with Evie is that he thinks she's quite shallow and she just accepts the world is all pretty and sparkly and shiny as she thinks it is. I mean, I have to be fair to her, if you don't know about something, you don't know about it, and when she does start to have her eyes opened, she really takes on board just how lucky she is and how different her life is to the life of some other people in London at that time. But I think it was really different to have that side of kind of historical England looked at in a romance, because often that side is ignored and we just look at the glittering sparkly bit and we forget that most people didn't live like that. Most people, it was a lot harder than that. So I really enjoyed that bit, and I do now need to go back and read book number 2 because that's the one I missed out. So next up we get to my personal favourite Stacey Reid book so far. My Darling Duke is just this book is so good. It is kind of a Beauty and the Beast. It's not really, but it kind of is. There's a damaged, very, very damaged, scarred, tortured hero. He has been through the wars and spat out the other side, and I just loved him from the moment the book started. Just amazing. This is also part of her Sinful Wallflower series, and this is probably one of my favourite takes on the wallflower trope. This is such a fun way to look at wallflowers. Basically, a group of girls get together and decide that they are sick to death of putting up with being stuck in the background and ignored and being good little girls, protecting their reputations, doing what society says, not breaking the rules, and just getting left on the sidelines and ignored for whatever reason, because they have no dowries, because they're poor, because they are considered, not as high class, whatever reason, they are ignored and they have had enough. And so they, as a group, decide that they are going to create situations that are scandalous, that are attention-seeking, that are newsworthy, things that are going to get them noticed, to throw themselves into society and kind of go, look at us, we are here, we are people, we need attention. Kitty decides to fake an engagement to the Duke of Thornton, who is, his real name is Alex, and he is a recluse. No one has seen him for years. He has disappeared from society. Nobody's seen him. No one's knows what's going on. There's some big secret around him, and, he's just out there. So she decides it'll be really convenient to decide that she is engaged to him. She announces it in the papers, she spreads the rumour around, and she lives for a while in London as the fiancé of the Duke of Thornton. Little does she realise, the Duke of Thornton, who is minding his own business up in Scotland, finds out about this, hears about it, and his reaction is so unexpected. Rather than being angry, as you would assume someone would be, he is kind of intrigued and kind of fascinated by what kind of woman would be that bold to make up this rumour and to just live with it. And she's gets herself into some rather awkward situations where it's like, you know, the sisters are trying to give her money and set her up in a nice house because she has a horrible house, because that's what is expected of the fiancé of the Duke of Thornton. She's a bit like, I don't really want to accept this, but at the same time, if I don't accept it, it's going to look weird that I'm not accepting it. So he heads to London to meet her, and just everything about this book was brilliant. Their chemistry from the moment they meet was fantastic. He kind of tolerates her and basically invites her back to his estate in Scotland where they have to hang out. She has to go there unchaperoned for a couple of weeks, and of course things get frisky and things get steamy and it's all good, but there are some pretty big obstacles in their way, mainly which relate to Alex and his health and his injuries and what he may or may not be able to do in a marriage and kind of how much of a husband he could be. So he's kind of quite happy to let her go along with his ruse for a while, but has no real intention of making it an official marriage. It was just such a cute book. I just loved it. I loved Alex. I loved Kitty. I loved them together. I loved them apart. I didn't mind the final conflict when obviously you have to have the bit where it looks like they're not going to end up together. I thought that was really kind of good. I just loved it. I really enjoyed it. It was such a good book. And like I said, I think it's probably my favourite Stacey Reid book that I've read so far. It was really emotional as well as sexy, and that's what a great romance should be. A great romance should get your pulse stirring, but also kind of, you know, play with those heartstrings a bit. It was just perfect. And then the last Stacey Reid book that I read is book 2 in the Sinful Wallflower series, and that is her Wicked Marquess. And this follows straight on from the first book. It's the same premise. The wallflowers that are trying to break out of their wallflower pigeonhole, I suppose. And this wallflower is Marianne. She decides to start a rumour about herself to make herself sound as if she's been compromised. I think she again is trying to get out of marriage. I feel like everyone's trying to get out of marriage. Just like everybody is trying to avoid being married. I think that's just like a thing that happens in Regency England. She hears a rumour that Nicholas St Ives has been seen, who is a scandalous rake, by the way, in case you're wondering, has been seen climbing out of a lady's bedroom, and she decides to spread the rumour that that was her bedroom. That was her that he was sneaking out of. He obviously is like, what? Why are you starting these rumours? He then does actually sneak into her bedroom to have a conversation with her. And so obviously then the two of them get thrown together. They spend more time together. There's a lot of sneaking in and out of bedrooms in this one. I loved it. There was also a revenge plot going on, and there is a content warning for a previous assault and murder of a girl who's not in the story. It's like a prologue-y kind of thing. That is the reason Nicholas is kind of there. He's trying to solve this crime and find out who's responsible, and more importantly, get the people who are responsible. And that's where he's kind of trying to avoid Marianne, because he doesn't want to drag her into that and kind of get her involved unnecessarily. But it was so good. So there was a whole kind of mystery element and an intrigue going on, as well as all the sexy times. Just had everything. I don't think I liked it quite as much as My Darling Duke, but I'm talking like by a whisker, not quite as much. And that's because My Darling Duke just scarred tortured heroes on my jam. They're what I like, so it won me over completely. Her Wicked Marquess is number 2. I don't think there's another one yet. I think that's it. I think that's as far as we've got with that. Write some more, please, Stacey Reid. Write some more, because I love them. Love them, love them, love them. So good. So there we have it. At last, it's only like nearly March, but I've finally finished my January wrap up, and I've now got to immediately go and plan my February one. I'm really bad at this YouTube thing, really. But thank you very much if you managed to get to the end. I really do appreciate it. I know there was a lot to talk about today. And yeah, I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!